I think that a lot of people don't really realize what a tremendous, important contribution uh, international students make to higher education in the United States. I don't think we are really very aware of what the impact of COVID-19 has had on foreign students. So that's why we put together a panel to keep it local, really focusing more on Colorado, although I'm sure that Inta and Mark can address nationwide what's going on right now. Inta Morris is the Chief Operating Officer for Colorado Department of Higher Education and Director of StudyColorado. And her office is basically responsible for promoting Colorado colleges and universities. Mark Hallett is Senior Director of International Students and Scholar Services at Colorado State University. He's responsible for immigration services, federal compliance, intercultural programming with the campus and community, and international student recruitment and admissions. And then to give us a student perspective, we're really grateful that Omar Shabab, a Fulbright scholar from Jordan, could join us today. He works as a graduate research assistant at CSU and is doing his master's degree in water resources engineering. With that introduction, I'll turn it over to Inta Morris for her presentation.
Thank you so much, Stanley, for the introduction, and thanks to all of you for coming and joining this conversation. So I'm going to start off by giving a general overview of what international higher education looked like beginning of 2020, so pre-COVID, some of the trends that we were seeing at the time, and then talk a little bit about, at a high level, what COVID has done in Colorado, and in particular, obviously, with students here, but internationalization generally. I'm going to turn it over to Mark then to give a bit of a institutional and community perspective on how the impact that this has all had at CSU. Then I'm going to mention a campaign that we have going on right now that talks about why you all should care about this. And then, as we said, we'll get a student perspective on all this. So with that, I will go ahead and take us back to, well, let me first to say a little bit more about StudyColorado. Yeah, as Stanley said, StudyColorado it's a program within the Colorado Department of Higher Education. So it operates a little bit like a membership organization or a little mini nonprofit, but it is a program of the state government housed at the Colorado Department of Higher Education. And the mission is to support the internationalization goals of Colorado's institutions of higher education. So again, as you heard, this is a program where we work with all the colleges and universities in the state that have an international agenda, and we try to support their goals at internationalization. What we're talking about today is primarily about students coming to Colorado and our efforts to really market Colorado as a destination for higher education. But StudyColorado has a broader mission. As I say here, internationalization. We do also very much support our own students going abroad for the advantages that brings them, as well as just the internationalization generally. So now let me go back to early 2020. And what I'm going to do is just give you some of the trends that we were seeing at the time globally, as well as in Colorado, and some numbers to illustrate those trends. So first of all, I think it would come as no surprise that basically for the past 15 years, we have seen the number of students who are crossing a border to get their education really increase exponentially. It went from about 2 million to about 5 million in roughly those 15 years. And it wasn't just going across an ocean. There's at the same time a lot of students who were staying in their region but crossing a border. So for example, in Asia, we saw a lot more students going to China or Japan or Korea from that region for their education. Same thing's happening in Latin America. Students going to the next better economy. And that really is the reason, and it's what you would expect, that as economies improve, students want to go to the next better economy or a better economy to get their education. So the number of students coming to the US has similarly been increasing. For the past decade, it has gone up every year, anywhere from 5 to 10 to even more %. And we reached 1 million, as you can see the number there, 1,095,000 last year. That's not, and by last year, I actually mean 18-19. So that was a high point. And we've seen that number going up every year. So trend number one, student mobility has been increasing. Trend number two that I want to mention is that while, as I just said, the number of students coming to the US had been increasing every year, a few years ago, we started seeing that increase slow. And this is not, a lot of people assume this has been under this administration, but it actually started a little bit earlier. And the number of students slowed down. You can see the numbers there, 2% in 2018, 0.5% in 2019. And then the number of new students coming in, that is freshmen their first year, that actually has declined the past few years. You can see the graph on the right, that shows new students coming in. So as students, the overall number continued to increase just barely, number of new students coming in slowed. So why is this? Combination of things. So other countries, other English-speaking countries in particular, have over the past years become more and more attractive. So you look at the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all of those countries, their education systems have been getting better and better. They have also been doing a lot more marketing, and they have been trying, really promoting themselves, but frankly, much more than the US as a higher education destination. They're also cheaper, and the US higher education system has continued to get more and more expensive. Any of you with kids or grandkids, or if you know anyone going to college, you know that in the US it has gotten really quite expensive. And for international students, especially those who are coming from lesser developed countries, it really is a hurdle. Also, the US, our visa policies, and in particular policies with regard to students being able to work here, are more challenging than a lot of countries, more restrictive. For a lot of students, whether they're coming from India or Africa or frankly, pick a country, even Canada, one of the things they want to do in addition to having the classes is get work experience. That it is for many as important as the actual academic experience. Well, in the US, it has frankly always been fairly difficult for students to work. I think Mark will probably talk a little bit more about OPT, optional practical training. So there are ways that students can do work here, but it's limited and it's tougher than a lot of other countries. And then finally, I'll just say there's some policies that have changed under this administration, and there are a lot of perceptions out there. So it's a combination of both of those has led to a sense among a lot of students in a lot of countries that they're not really wanted here in the US. So first trend, increasing mobility generally for higher ed. Second trend, US remaining certainly attractive, but especially compared to others, getting a little less attractive. It's no longer the only game in town, I guess is the best way to say it. And then third trend, and I'm not going to go into this a lot, this is frankly a whole other topic, but there's a lot going on in higher education that is changing the way we do education. And while some of this is good, some of it's bad, some of it helps international students, some maybe not, there's just a lot that is impacting education that comes into play when students are considering where to get their post-secondary education. Everything from online education, competency-based education, MOOCs, which are massively open. Oh God, now I'm gonna forget everyone knows what a MOOC is. Someone help me out, MOOC. Massively open online class. something like that, right? Anyway, so a lot changing in higher ed as we look forward. So that is sort of where we were nationally, globally. Let me now talk just a little bit about Colorado, where we were early 2020. Colorado was getting last year 12,000 international students. That you may not know that, that's a lot. They're primarily at the institutions that you can see on the right there. And I think that's probably pretty obvious, that University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado State University, University of Denver, it's a private institution, University of Colorado in Denver, and Colorado School of Mines. Those are the top 5 colleges and universities. But frankly, you can pick almost any of our colleges, universities. Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado Mesa, Western in Gunnison. They all get a handful to a few, tens of students. And the top sending countries you can see there are China, and China is the same across the board in the US. About a third of all of our international students in the US and in Colorado come from China. India, not far behind. Saudi Arabia for Colorado, and a lot of the Saudi Arabian students come here on government scholarships. Kuwait, same is true with Kuwait. There are a lot of government scholarships. They sponsor the students to come, get the education, and then go back home. And South Korea is the 5th sending country for us. As I said, we are also concerned with and very interested in promoting our own students to go abroad. About 5,600 Colorado students went abroad last year. This data is a little bit old. But our students, which this also may or may not be a surprise, but our own students are a little less adventuresome, and they like to go to the UK, Italy, Spain, France. Those are some of the top countries, and Australia usually gets pretty high up on that list too. So that's what Colorado looked like generally in early 2020. And then, as you all know, we have COVID. And it seems like ages ago. Honestly, it seems like several years ago to me. But in March, we had the first case here in Colorado, and not soon after that, Governor Polis declared a disaster emergency, and not soon after that, we had the stay-at-home order in Colorado. March 25th was when the governor proclaimed that. At the same time, about the month leading up to this, as you all will remember, we had other countries shutting down, borders being closed, flights being stopped, international travel banned. So for higher education, also things pretty much came to a screeching halt. Our colleges and universities, they all went to remote instruction. And that was both by necessity and because of the executive order. And basically, students went home and did not return after spring break. For international students, life was a bit tougher. So a lot of them, as you can imagine, could not get home. And so they stayed on campus along with other students who could not go home. And our institutions were all very good at providing the basic services, keeping limited dorms open, providing food, providing medical services, and anything else for those students. But as you can imagine, and as you will hear presumably more from my colleagues, wasn't easy. I'm just gonna say real briefly where we are now, and then if people have questions, we can talk in a little bit more detail. But after the stay-at-home order was rescinded, institutions over the summer started holding a few courses in person and planning for the fall. And that was, as the contact person here at the Department of Higher Education for the institutions on COVID planning, I can tell you a lot of planning went into what's been going on over the past few weeks, opening up to students back on campus. And one of the big concerns, of course, has been, will students come back? And we'll talk a little bit more, but almost all of our institutions have seen some decrease in enrollment. As far as international, the international students that were here, I think a lot of them stayed. Some did not. Some have managed to get back home. I think the institutions have a few new students, but for the most part, those would be transfers within the US because, as you all know, international travel is still very limited. I pulled this quote just from 2 days ago, September 11th, Friday. And this is about CU Boulder, where if you see how much their numbers have gone down for this fall, freshman enrollment declined 12.3%. And among international students, it's plummeted 22% on the Boulder campus for a total budget hit of around 66 million. I think every campus around the state, not every, most campuses around the state are going to tell a similar story. So we'll get to a little bit more of that. But before we do, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Mark. Mark, you are on.
Oh, well, hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning into this. Thanks, Inta. Good to see you. So as she said, I will share the CSU perspective on this, and probably not so dissimilar from a lot of our colleagues around the state. Let's move to the next slide. Just want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we faced here in Fort Collins in the spring. So just to recap the spring, we moved to online classes and remote advising right after spring break. And that decision was really sort of up to the brink of knowing when that was going to occur. And as Inta said, a lot of our students weren't able to stay home because home is so far away. They were staying here. One of the things that you might not immediately think of that was such a big impact was that a lot of our students, while they get their money from home or so forth, they often have to sort of eke by and they work on campus. And international students can work on campus up to 20 hours a week. So lots and lots of our students had these jobs. Well, all of a sudden, these jobs were no longer needed because offices were closed, sporting events weren't happening, and there weren't as many people needing to be fed in the residence halls and so forth. So I know that we had hundreds of international students lose their jobs. We're very fortunate that we had some RAM aid, it's called, institutional aid. We had one donor, anonymous donor, who gave $1 million to that, which was a real godsend to our students. And international students were able to get some support there as well. I can talk a little bit more about that as we go along. And then we also have a Roy Mangelli Fund, which targets international students for emergency relief. Now that's a very small, modest fund, and we've just started it, but it's also something that we've had to call upon in a few situations. Then the Student Exchange Visitor Program, which is part of Homeland Security and reports to ICE, they liberalized the F1 regulations that we work with. But the majority of international students are F1 visa holders, and they receive immigration documents called I-20s. So we were allowed to, instead of giving them paper copies with so-called wet signatures, work online and digitally sign these and send them to them, which was very good because of the mobility issues that were occurring in the time of all of this. We pulled back all of our study abroad students to CSU, about 600, had to be evacuated home and before the flights stopped. We had the semester at sea voyage that was going around the world. It was in Johannesburg, South Africa, and we flew all of those students back from there. So it was wild times. CSU, over the course of the spring, then developed what our fall plans. And our fall plans made us a hybrid model. Hybrid model being that we have some face-to-face classes and we also have some online classes. Other institutions went to fully online classes, including Harvard, MIT, University of California and California state systems, and so forth. In the middle of the summer, on July 6th, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, issued some guidance in which it said that students at schools that were 100% online would not be allowed to stay in the U.S. Well, this caused quite an uproar because that's between 300,000 and 400,000 international students who would be affected by this rule. And there was a lot of concern that potentially they would be deportable, potentially they would be subject to a thing called unlawful presence. And if you accrue enough of that, you can be barred for 3 to 10 years from coming back to the United States. Of course, they were concerned about the continuity of their academic program that they'd invested so much in. I mean, it was a big problem, and it really didn't follow the normal administrative process for these types of rules. This was during a time when there was a lot of national debate about, back to school or not back to school, and institutions were trying to make a decision about what made the most sense based on public health and safety and other guidance and so forth. At the same time, U.S. consulates that issue the visas that students need in order to travel to the United States had suspended their services. So all of the new students who were trying to get a visa in order to come to the U.S. and begin their education in the fall were unable to get the necessary visa. And that situation is still in place. There's some opening of consulates and visa issuance is beginning, but there's a backlog of demand and the visa appointments are taking a long time to arrange. So that's still upon us. There's a lot of different travel restrictions that came into play. We've all heard a lot about the ban on people in China coming to the US. I know that we had the wife and daughter of one of our professors went home to Wuhan, China of all places, and was stuck there and made it out on one of the US government arranged flights and had to quarantine in California. But it basically stopped people from coming from China. And then as the pandemic moved through Italy, I know my son was studying at Johns Hopkins in Italy at the time, and when COVID really hit there, a lot of restrictions on Europe, and these are in both directions, Brazil and so forth. And of course, all this led to a lot of reduced ability to get flights. So we had students graduate from, I'll just pick a country, Vietnam, in May, and they weren't able to get flights home to their families for quite a long time. So there a lot of disruption happening. Now we just learned that the USCIS is not going to furlough 13,000 employees, but that's the part of immigration that manages a lot of benefits processing. So if you want a work permit for after graduation, that's where that happens. But it's a little topsy-turvy with those government agencies as well. And then just a couple of other things that impact the desirability right now of the U.S. One is our relative status with the pandemic, with the higher number of cases in the U.S. As opposed to other countries. A lot of family members are saying, well, should I let my son or daughter go there right now? Maybe we should wait, or maybe we should make other plans. The economic impact to families is certainly not just overseas, but it's in the US, but it's overseas as well. And then there have been some presidential proclamations, the regulatory things, which I'll talk about a little bit more, that have restricted movement to the US. So let's move on to the next slide, if you will. Now, one thing I'll say about CSU is that we have always been very supportive of international students. We have a new president, Joyce McConnell, and she is also very, very supportive. In fact, she issued a letter in support of international students opposing the ICE order of July 6th. We mobilized with our congressional delegation members to rescind that order. And we worked very hard to support a lawsuit by Colorado and also an amicus brief of a lawsuit that Harvard and MIT submitted in opposition to that rule. So the reason that this was important was certainly in support of other institutions, but also we're thinking down the road. What happens if in the middle of the fall semester we have a big outbreak at CSU or at the other Colorado colleges and we have to shut down again? What's the legal status of our students? What's our ability to fulfill their investment in their education and their academic and professional goals? We want to make sure that we are on the right side of this and that we're doing right by our students. And to do that, we need maximum flexibility during the pandemic, we think. So in terms of responses, our office had, it's like the United Nations of Northern Colorado. I mean, the people coming in and out of the office, it's a real joy to work in an office like this and see all the different cultures and all the different intellectual backgrounds and all the different socioeconomic and life experiences of the students from over 100 countries. Well, we went to all remote advising, and that was a big adjustment for us and for our students, of course, but that's now functioning at a pretty high level. We're also known, not just in Colorado, but around the country for having a very strong programming outreach where we try to get this crossroads of cultures to mix, because we think that there are a lot of, there's some meta goals of international educational exchange, which are beyond the classroom, which include the community, and we have a very active Fort Collins International Center group of hundreds of people who have been involved since the 1950s in doing weekly events with students, doing all kinds of backyard diplomacy, if you will. Well, now that's all virtual programming, but we've been fairly innovative. We've got trivia nights. We've had some cooking classes online. If you want to learn to make orchietta from a student who works in my office with her mother in Italy, or some other things like that, check out those links. They're kind of fun. We also figured out a way that we would try to bridge students so that they would be able to, since they couldn't get a visa, start remotely from India or China or France, wherever they are, during the fall semester. And we have had some who have done that, and they will come here. We also signed a contract with a company so that we could pay some of our graduate assistants who will be helping to grade papers remotely. And then hopefully they'll get their visas and come and be with us in person in the spring. And I mentioned the assistance, financial assistance for students. We're now moving into the fall, and we're hopeful that we will be able to continue to offer this level of support, but a lot of this has been drawn down. I think we've had over 400 international students who have been helped with this, these funds, and still not able to find campus jobs, but we're working with the food bank and other things. There's a lot of need, and not just international students, but across the board, students are having this. And okay, let's move to the next couple of slides here. So employment is also an issue. I talked about student employment, but you may not know that we also work with what we call international scholars here. And these are mostly postdocs, people who are research associates, some of them even working on COVID cures, and also new assistant professors. And working in the office, it's kind of interesting to see the kinds of cases that come in from the academic departments where they're hiring very esoteric type of specializations, and it's a very small pool of candidates who are qualified for some of the things that we have. And my favorite one is, I was working on a case of a H1B professor who was going to come in, and we needed somebody at the vet teaching hospital. The specialization was canine dermatology. Well, I mean, how many canine dermatologists are there, right? But we do the visa work for that. So commonly used, we have about 108 J1 scholars, which is a program through the US State Department. And also the H1B visa, which you hear about mostly in terms of high-tech companies like Microsoft and Oracle and so forth, but universities also have those, and we have about 90 of those at the moment. Let's go on to the next one. So in terms of those H1 visas, we have not really been impacted too much by the freeze in visa and entry restriction, because most of the people that we hire on our H1B visas are already in the United States in some other visa capacity, or we're just doing extensions of the ones that we have. But other industries are really been affected significantly, and usually in the high-tech areas. The next slide. And then similarly with J1, we have been affected a bit here. For example, we put our exchange students on J1 visas. And last year we had 16 come in, and this year only one. Now, exchange means the student studies at Colorado State, an American, a Coloradan, and pays the regular rate, but then goes to our partner, let's say in London, and then the student from London pays there and they come here. So these things are not happening to the extent that they were. But it really hurts other kinds of industries. You might have heard about the au pair program. Here in Colorado, it would really hurt Vail Associates. Vail Associates, as you may know, hires a lot of foreign workers on a temporary basis to come in and work at the ski slopes. And so they are very worried about the impact this will have on the ski industry this year. So next slide there, Inta. And then Inta mentioned OPT. This stands for Optional Practical Training. And this is one of the F1 immigration benefits. So typically a student will come in and they will, if they want to, apply for a work permit in their field of study. And this will be for a year after graduation. And if they can find a job within a couple of months, then they can stay and work on an internship in some field. This is a really positive benefit of studying in the United States. And a lot of other countries now are offering more and more generous basis for working here. So every time there's talk, and there has been talk of limiting or eliminating F1 OPT benefits, it does put a damper on our ability to attract the best and the brightest students to study in the US. And also, I think it's very good for some of our companies, because if you get, let's say, an MBA who then goes to work for an American company that has subsidiaries abroad, they understand how things work at the home company. They know a lot of the people there, but they also have the cultural knowledge of their home countries. And so it's a great way for America to maintain its linkages through this program. So we've always been strong advocates of OPT and its impact and benefit for the United States. It could be a brain gain for us, but also it can keep us connected. Now, there's some challenges to this, some possibility of executive action to curtail that, and it's having a negative effect both on the recruitment side and also for this for our students who are graduating into this very difficult economy. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. And then, so students did arrive on campus this year. We had them quarantined for 14 days once they arrived. Good news is we had our student health insurance covering that, so there's testing and they're tracing, and so far at CSU we have a very low incidence of problems, but it's still weird. I mean, a story I can relate is it was the last day before faculty had to decide whether or not their courses would be face-to-face or online or some combination of that. And there was an outbreak among student athletes and also in one fraternity. This was late summer. So there was a big rush by some faculty to do more online and less face-to-face. So, you know, there's a lot of jitters, just like there are in the K-12 system. And, you know, all of you and your families are going through that as well. So let's move along. I just want to talk a little about the effect on our numbers. So the numbers of new students, you'll see the last few years, typically, you know, we're 420, 450 students. This year, only 200. So we have half the number of new students that we normally attract. And you can see it broken down there by graduate, transfer, and undergraduate. Graduate, of course, being our master's and PhD and our veterinary medicine doctorate. And undergrads, I think everyone understands the bachelor's. Transfer, you'll see that we have a really big dip. And one of the things, the explanations for that is that we typically have a lot of transfer students who are coming from our partner universities. We have a number of partner universities in China and also in Vietnam and some other locations where they'll do the first 2 years there and then they'll transfer to CSU. And when they graduate, they'll have a degree from both institutions. But the Chinese and the Vietnamese students are not coming in this year for because of the restrictions and the visa problems in the pandemic. Next, please. This just shows by college. We have 8 colleges at Colorado State, and you'll see that natural sciences and engineering have seen sharp decreases, as has natural resources as well. College of Business is also very popular here. And by country, China is really a big impact. The Chinese students were typically about a quarter of our university. And fall of 17, we had 673 Chinese. As of this semester, we have just under 400, so a very sharp decrease. India is a very sensitive market. I remember giving a speech there in Hyderabad the day after there was an Indian was shot in Kansas City. You might remember that. And it's such a hypersensitive media market, and they talk about the US and whether it's safe or unsafe in these trends. So we were really fearful that this would even be higher, but we have a number of students who have decided they're not going to start online. They don't really value online education so much. They're going to hopefully defer and come in the spring if they're able to do that. Hopefully we won't be losing that many students from there. But you just see kind of what the trends are for some of the top sending countries at CSU. And here's the overall picture. We've gone from 1883 international students, that's in the undergrad, grad, seeking programs, to 1504. So Boulder's down 22%, we're down 20%. So usually we like to have a little friendly competition there, but this is one where it's not good for us or them. You'll see that we actually have been doing quite good in terms of increasing our international enrollment over the past several years. In 2010, we had about 1,000. And by 2016, we had doubled that to 2,000 international students on campus. That doesn't include our students who are here learning English prior to starting a degree program, but those numbers are very, very low right now here and also across the US. So we're taking a hit, sort of like after 9/11 is what I would compare this to. And hopefully we will be able to rebuild it, but it's quite the challenge. All right, so just to sum up, we've had some issues with the regulatory climate getting a little bit tougher, and then our competitors taking advantage of us in that way. And now with the pandemic, some of the impacts are lower enrollment. There's obviously a huge financial impact on the institution. We've gone to an online and face-to-face course mix, and hopefully our measures that we're taking up here will keep us all safe, and we'll be able to go until fall break. Afterwards, we'll be all online. A lot of on-campus employment has been lost, so that's a pocketbook issue for a lot of our students. And then with the bad economy, it's a little tougher after graduation. Still a lot of travel restrictions. We're still dealing with a lot of people who have feelings of isolation, so mental health concerns, stress, and so forth. And we're doing a lot of outreach as we can. So we're making the best of it here. And those are some of the things that are happening at CSU. Back to you, Inta.
Great. So we wanted to end this part of the presentation with just a few statements about why this matters. We, as I think, international education community, just really believe that it's more important now more than ever that we keep our global ties and that we not shut our doors, that we try to do what we can to get more students here and to make sure that our students are able to travel again as well. So we've started this had this little social media campaign for the last few weeks talking about why you should care, the different aspects of international education and international students. And one of those being that they contribute to the $1.4 billion in innovative research conducted at Colorado institutions of higher education. I think if you go to any of our research institutions, and that's CSU, you just heard from, and CU, and UNC as well, and School of Mines, they are really, they're conducting world-class research, and all of those labs are fully international. And, we don't know who's going to make the next contribution to what, whether it's a vaccine for COVID or any other innovation. It's all of us working, all of our students working together. And so we really believe that we need to keep those students here. In addition, they add cultural diversity to our campuses and to our communities. And they teach our own students how to be globally aware, globally competent, how to work in tomorrow's economy. So I don't think there's hardly a industry alive these days that our students are going to go into where they are not going to come into contact with some sort of global aspect to it. And so I think having students here, sending ours abroad, just adds to their education and their perspective. And then is the financial impact. So Mark talked about CSU, the contributions and the impact on the budget. Statewide, international students contribute about 500 million annually to our economy. So just as for a business, and export brings money to that company, it also has an impact on the whole economy. And so we look at the whole Colorado economy and talk about education being our 5th largest export. And it brings in, like I said, 500 million a year. So that this year is going to be a lot less. It also supports 6,000 jobs in the state. So that's why we think that it's more important now than ever, now more than ever, to keep our global ties, maintain our international education opportunities, and keep those students here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over now to Omar. Are you, let's see, Omar, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, if that's okay, and let you take it from here.
Thank you, Inta, and thank you everybody for giving me this opportunity. My name is Omar. I'm a graduate student from Jordan. I'm a Fulbright scholar, and I'm doing my master's degree of water resources engineering. Where I come from, Jordan is among the poorest countries in terms of fresh water resources. And since I can remember, I always wanted to, do this impact in my community, my country, and even maybe the world. And after I finished my bachelor's degree back home, I worked for almost 4 years in consulting firms, engineering firms, and then I decided and I realized that if I need to make that impact, I needed higher education, I needed research, and there's no better place right now on earth than the United States. Despite what being marketed, it's still going to be the country that puts the highest resources on research. And quite frankly, it's the country that I was sure that I'm going to be welcome in than any other country. So I applied for Fulbright, I got the scholarship, I came here. I did well, but then COVID hit. COVID has affected me as an international student on different levels. On a personal level, it's hard when a worldwide pandemic hits and you're away from your family and your friends. Especially that, again, as an international student, most of my friends tends to be in that circle. And most of them went home in March when the pandemic started. Like, they were planning to get there and stay for a little bit until like it cools down, but they got stuck. So during the stay at home order, it wasn't it was challenging to stay by your own. And in terms of my work and research, at that point, COVID, the closure of campus, the closure of laboratories, and etc., led for some effects on my research. I was supposed to be done and like to graduate by the end of July, but I had to request an extension of my funding from the Department of State, and they understand in my situation, and I got an extension until the end of October next month. So right now I'm on like a race with time to finish my research, because if I don't finish it, I need to go back home without the degree and like continue working from there, which, as you might expect, like it's not going to be easy. And also, this 3-month extension has left a financial burden in terms of at that point I had to find a house, and most student housing companies offer annual leases, so I needed to find an annual lease. It was more expensive, And then by the end of October, I need to, it was the risk because I need now to find someone to take over my lease. And that's just an example. Also, working from home wasn't easy. You need a good laptop, a good PC, and to secure like a quiet environment so you can, so I could go on with my research. It wasn't easy. CSU was very helpful in terms of that. I was able to, I was lucky enough to get part of the RAMAID fund, which was extremely helpful during the 3 months of the summer. Especially that my family wasn't able, you know, when COVID hit Jordan, also my family got affected. So it wasn't easy, for example, for me to request money from my family. So that was extremely helpful. The staff were very understanding. But ultimately right now, the effect of COVID has been extended to the point that I'm gonna graduate in October, and I was planning to get an OPT or find a job in America. But due to COVID, most of companies that I was in contact with did a hiring freeze starting March. And now that the market is opening again, opportunities are not as much. And due to the policies of sponsorship, and that's just my personal feeling, that most companies would rather go for a US citizen rather than paying sponsorship fees or going for that risk, given the uncertainty of like executive orders or any policies that might affect the employment of international students. So like right now, I have less than a month to find a job. If I don't, I have to leave the country by mid-November to avoid any consequences of unlawful presence in the United States. One point I should maybe mention, I still believe that the United States is the best country to pursue higher education. And I'm not just saying that because I'm here, it's just is, you know, it's a fact. But my friends, for example, back home, when they talk about pursuing higher education right now, some of them might prefer Germany, Canada, Australia, and even New Zealand for one simple reason, which is when they meet the criteria that these countries are looking for in a student and they prove themselves, by the time they finish their research and get their job, they have a good opportunity to get you know, a permanent residency in that country and be a part of that community, and you know, they don't fear for their future. And I still feel like that's one point that the United States falls a little bit behind in terms of competition. But yeah, other than that, it's kind of like I have no more views on this issue.
And I will say thank you to everyone from me and on behalf of my colleagues, and turn it back to you, Stanley.
Okay, thank you very much. You know, this was just a tremendous presentation today. This is really like a clinic. You guys covered so many important issues. And Omar, I'm really appreciative of your presentation because really I think you gave us a feel for not only why foreign students want to come study in the United States, but also how COVID is impacting you. And I'm sure that so many foreign students must have the same story. And we'll get to questions now. Anyway, well, we had a couple of comments to start with, and one was that there's many countries where English isn't the first language, such as the Netherlands, that are offering shorter and less expensive degrees in English, and that is true. There's, I think, many countries of the world now are offering that. And then we have Joe had asked about the national economic impact, and I think Aaron McDonald responded to that. I got some figures from IIE, which was in 2018. The contribution to the U.S. economy was $45 billion. Does that sound about right, Inta?
Yeah, I don't have the total, but that sounds about right. And in the chat, there's someone put the NAFSA economic value tool. NAFSA is the source that most of us use for those numbers. So I would direct people there as well.
Okay, so I don't have questions yet. If you could type those in the chat room. Otherwise, if you want to ask a question directly, if you could raise your hand, so that we don't have everybody jumping in at once. I do have a quote sent privately to me, which is saying that, paraphrasing Mark Twain, just like travel, studying abroad is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. So I hope we can see it increase sooner rather than later, because it's sorely needed in today's world. So that leads me to a question I wanted to ask, which is that besides the economic impact, what are the other benefits of international students? Why does the whole world want to have international students besides the economic benefit? Like, for example, does having a diverse population of international students give a university a better reputation?
I'll take a stab at this one. I think there's a lot of good reasons. I mean, one reason is just the exposure. You know, the United States is the leading country, is the most powerful country, and we have interest everywhere in the world, and we have involvement everywhere in the world. And as such, we need an informed citizenry in order to make good decisions. And that includes diplomatic, business, military decisions. And if you know someone, if you've had some personal experience, it's a lot harder to dehumanize people as a larger entity, because you say, well, you know, I met Omar. I have a little bit of an insight into what is Jordanian like. So I think it's important for our own citizenry to have some exposure for a lot of reasons, both in sort of the international, but also on a personal level. There's a lot you can learn from one another, intellectually, culturally, just in terms of value systems. You know, if you've lived abroad, you've had to examine your own value system, the value system of the country where you've lived, and to make some independent choices about your value system. I think that's a very important thing for people to experience. Inta talked about the economic impact to the state, not just in tuition, but to the local economy as well, whether it's buying cars or computers or things like that. And that's, you know, as they say, the fifth largest export in the state and also in the country. But there's also, if you've read Richard Florida's books, it talks, you know, the old notions of brain drain and brain gain and so forth have changed. And people work in different countries for different periods of time. So there's a brain circulation notion out there. And in terms of, you know, research labs, whether it be COVID research or cancer research or automotive or whatever you're talking about, we need this type of collaboration because the world has common sets of problems, whether it's feeding 5 billion people or if it's climate change and the environment. There's so many things where we need to teach people to cooperate. And having this propinquity where you're shoulder to shoulder or you're sitting next to the person in a classroom, that's very, very important. So both for students and researchers and professors, we need this, you know, more than ever, as Inta says.
Inta, yeah, go ahead.
There's, I mean, Mark pretty much covered all of it. I can only echo what he said. I think for any of you who have studied abroad or traveled abroad. I did. It changed my life. So I think there's the personal benefits and the personal growth that you experience, and seeing the world through different eyes and seeing your own country through different eyes. That only helps us as adults dealing with the world. Then there's the institutional benefit. There's the benefit to our communities of having this diversity and other cultures and new perspectives. And then again, the national advantages. We have individuals now all over the world who have lived in Colorado, some of our own students who have gone abroad and stayed abroad, and then a lot of students who have studied here and gone home to their home countries. They are now natural ambassadors, natural business partners, natural friends of Colorado, and we can only grow from it and benefit from it. So I think all of that and more.
Do you think that that U.S. higher education can recover 100% in terms of foreign students coming here, or do you think that this could cause some damage that could take years to repair?
I'll take that one first, Mark, and then pass it to you, and also invite anyone else to comment on that. It's a very good question, and I guess I have a couple of answers to it. First, I think it's unlikely that this will be back to normal September. I certainly think and believe we are moving toward a vaccine. We're moving in toward getting it under control, but I think that the road to normal is going to be a lot longer than that. I think that yes, we will recover, but that also will take some time. Mark mentioned 9/11 in his talk, the numbers, and if you look at the numbers from then, it's sort of, I'm guessing, going to be the same thing where we had a dramatic drop and then it took a while to build back up. This is, of course, a little different because this is a global pandemic. It's not an incident that happened here in the United States. But I don't know, I mean, you can sort of ask yourself, how long is it going to take for you to be completely comfortable traveling again and doing everything that you did before? I think it's going to take a while. And I think that higher education will look different when we are out of this. I think the world, frankly, will look different. So I don't know when the new normal will be there. I think we will recover. I think there's enough of us who have a passion for internationalization and for these global ties and cultural collaboration and everything that absolutely we will get back there, but it'll take a while.
Well, that's really well said. I guess I'll make me think about the week of 9/11. I think that was on a Tuesday, and on Friday, I walked over to the Islamic Center, which is a few blocks off campus, because I wanted to show some solidarity. You know, there were some concerns that maybe there would be reprisals or, mistreatment of Muslims. And as I turned the corner, there was a little house that at that time was the mosque. And there was a large crowd gathered outside. And my first thought was, oh no, what's happening here? But no, it was the synagogue and a couple of churches and just people who got the word, and they were holding white flowers and they were lined up all around, and they were showing solidarity and support of our Muslim community. I mean, it was really moving, and it got a lot of, it spread the word about what a place Colorado is and how welcoming. In fact, we had lots of students transfer here from other states after that. So I know that it's not the same exactly, but I think we need to have benevolent policies that encourage and facilitate international educational exchange. That's a part of what will bring us back to where we were and help us grow to where we can grow to. And I also, I can't speak to the health, how all that's going to unfold, but I do know that enrollment for institutions of higher education is very important in international enrollment with the full fees paid by international students, and the scholarship support from foreign governments that want to give their students a good education to build their countries. That's going to be a big part of the solution. So hopefully we'll have good policies, we'll have proper investments, and we'll have that kind of spirit that I saw that day in 2001. So.
Okay, thank you.
So when a student applies for the Fulbright, they ask them to pick a number of schools, up to 4 schools, just to guarantee a spot, and then the Department of State picks the best fit. So I applied for Duke, Wisconsin, and Colorado State, and UMass at Amherst. And I got the 4 acceptances from 4 different schools, but then the Department of State picked Colorado State for one simple reason, which is like Colorado is the safest in terms of, it's the state that I was gonna feel most welcome in. So I just wanted to say thank you all for making Colorado this awesome.
Yeah, it's Colorado is a little bit of a hidden gem for international students, and CSU in particular is a hidden gem. So yeah, thank you so much.